Good to have you with us on this Friday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We're going to begin in Washington, where another government agency's employees appear to be on the chopping block. This is the Department of Health and Human Services, and it's the Trump administration's largest target for downsizing, announcing yesterday that an additional 10,000 jobs would be axed.
Another big headline out of Washington. NBC News has learned President Trump privately expressed anger at National Security Advisor Mike Waltz for his role in the Signal group chat debacle. That's according to two Republican sources with knowledge of the conversations. Waltz accidentally added a journalist to a group chat with other top national security officials who were discussing an attack on targets in Yemen. NBC News Washington correspondent Alice Barr joins us now with the very latest. Alice, good morning.
Good morning, Joe and Savannah. Starting off with Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. framing these sweeping cuts to his department as a means to reduce bureaucracy and refocus on making America healthy again, while promising to save taxpayers nearly $2 billion. Critics, though, are worrying what will be lost. The Department of Health and Human Services, the new target of the Trump administration's government cuts, center stage again, with the announcement HHS is set to slash 10,000 workers, including a planned 3,500 at the FDA and 2,400 at the CDC.
We're keenly focused on paring away excess administrators while increasing the number of scientists and frontline health providers.
The new cuts on top of 10,000 jobs gone through the Department of Government Efficiency. In all, the agency appears set to lose a quarter of its staff. Democrats worry American health care and research will suffer.
How they're going to backfill, how they're going to make sure we're not losing critical muscle.
Elon Musk appearing on Fox News with several DOJ staffers pushing back on criticism his team has moved too fast, occasionally forced to rehire fired workers, including at the FDA.
So we want to measure twice, if not thrice, and cut once. When we do make mistakes, we correct them quickly, and we move on.
As the White House acknowledged mistakes in that Signal group chat when a reporter was accidentally added alongside top Trump officials discussing sensitive plans for imminent U.S. airstrikes in Yemen.
The National Security Advisor took responsibility for that, and we have said we are making changes.
NBC News has learned President Trump is privately angry with National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who started the chat. That's according to two Republican sources with inside knowledge. A federal judge now ordering the officials in the chat to preserve the messages amid an ongoing lawsuit. And President Trump signed a new executive order targeting Smithsonian, museums, education and research centers, directing Vice President J.D. Vance to eliminate, quote, improper, divisive or anti-American ideology from programs at the institution which receives federal funding. Savannah and Joe.
All right, Alice Barr, thank you.
Well, for more on how these cuts could impact public health care and health in general, let's bring in NBC News medical analyst Dr. Vin Gupta. Dr. Gupta, always great to see you. So we're seeing these cuts to thousands of workers in the Health and Human Services Department. It's also right in the middle, by the way, of this growing measles outbreak. Do you think cuts like this can impact response to situations like that? What worries you the most?
Absolutely, Savannah. You know, we're seeing a few different things here. Number one, we're seeing that the comms are all being brought under Secretary Kennedy, and right now it's pretty distributed. NIH has their own comms, FDA has their own comms, CDC has their own comms, and now it's going to come under one individual. And there's going to be a lot of concerns here in terms of what does that actually look like in terms of independence of the agency to talk freely about the data and what's actually happening. And there was, we saw here on Friday, last Friday, the head spokesperson of the CDC actually resigned because they didn't feel like the CDC was following the data, because they were trying to, follow the priorities of a secretary that might not actually be following the science. So there's a lot of concerns here about clear public health information and how we're communicating to the public.
So some critics say they want the CDC to return to its core focus, infectious diseases. On the face, that may not sound like a problem, but why does that concern you?
You know, Joe, it's a good catchphrase, and on exactly on your point, this on the surface, great. The problem here is that if you look at the top 10 causes of disease, of risk factors for illness in the United States show, both back in 1990 and just as recently as the early 2020s, infectious disease does not top the top 10. And so that's when we think about, well, it's the Centers for Disease Control. It shouldn't focus just on infectious diseases. It doesn't focus just on infectious diseases. It focuses also on chronic disease, like high blood pressure, like diabetes, rightfully so, because that's what's actually impacting Americans. So what's going to happen about, the biggest killers of Americans across the country if they don't have a CDC looking out for what's actually impacting them? That's the question.
These cuts, they might generate savings in the short term, but how could all of this ultimately drive up healthcare costs, maybe, and then potentially could that damage the economy?
Absolutely. Prevention is ultimately the biggest value in healthcare. And what's going to happen here is, the former Secretary of Health and Human Services, Savannah, said, there's going to be real impacts to the most vulnerable, elderly, other programs there that actually help keep people out of the hospital. There's going to be impacts, no question, to things that are high quality care at lower cost, whether that's for people that are younger, keep them out of the hospital in the first place, or those that are healthy living or healthy aging at home. So yes, there's no question that we're going to see over time. To your point, we might see some short-term benefits in terms of cost reductions, just because we have 20,000 less people ultimately from where we started. But this is going to have real impacts on Americans.
All right, Dr. Vin Gupta, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Dealerships across the country are bracing for higher prices. It's because new tariffs on imported cars and auto parts will go into effect in a few days. So how much more could you expect to pay? NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans takes a closer look.
At car dealerships across the country,
your phones are ringing.
They're ringing. Customers are concerned.
We first met George Glassman last month. He owns Mitsubishi, Kia, Hyundai, Subaru, and Genesis dealerships in Michigan.
They want to make sure that they're getting in if they need a car and making that deal before the tariffs kick in. Consumers are going to bear the brunt of this, and it's going to be painful.
Car shoppers, dealers, and manufacturers bracing for higher prices as the president puts 25% tariffs on imported cars and auto parts.
If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff.
But almost half of cars sold in the U.S. and 60% of auto parts are imported. Goldman Sachs estimating tariffs could add $5,000 to $15,000 to the price of foreign-made cars and $3,000 to $8,000 on cars made in the U.S. because of border taxes on the parts. For Damon Jefferson, who works on an assembly line in Detroit, that cost may be worth it.
The American people have to realize that Trump is putting these tariffs in place to be able to keep the American people working.
The Trump administration banking on tariffs to spur more investments and bring factories back to the U.S. But retooling a factory is slow and costly.
The president would love to see all vehicles in the United States built in the U.S. with 100% U.S.-made parts. That's not going to happen. The industry is set up on a regional basis, so there will still be production in Mexico and in Canada.
Canada's prime minister says the U.S. is no longer a reliable partner.
We will respond forcefully. Nothing is off the table to defend our workers and our country.
Here in Miami, the Canadian government paying for billboards telling Americans tariffs are a tax on your grocery bill. Christine Romans, NBC News.
Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife Usha are set to visit an American military base in Greenland today as part of a scaled-back trip that's raised eyebrows on the Arctic island. The couple's unwelcome visit comes as tensions between Greenland and the U.S. are rising after President Trump repeatedly suggested the U.S. should take control of the Danish territory. NBC's Molly Hunter is on the ground with more.
The competition over the Arctic is heating up as Vice President J.D. Vance, Second Lady Usha Vance, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and Energy Secretary Chris Wright prepare to fly to the remote Northwest BD Fuchs Space Base to meet with U.S. military personnel, skipping out on the originally planned cultural tour stops in Greenlandic cities. Russian President Putin cautioned the U.S. is serious. Everybody knows very well, he said, about the U.S. plans to take over Greenland. President Trump doubled down.
We need Greenland, and the world needs us to have Greenland, including Denmark. Denmark has to have us have Greenland.
But why the fixation on the largest, least populated island in the world, a territory of Denmark?
Greenland is 80% ice, and as the ice melts, as you can see right here, due to global warming, that's where Trump sees opportunity.
Underneath all this ice lies the prospect of an estimated 1.5 million tons of rare earth elements, as well as oil and natural gas reserves. Strategic Arctic shipping lanes also opening up, and Russia and China together already working on the key northern sea route. Here in the capital of Nuuk, Anders Larsen says they like America here, but not enough to want to be American.
You feel backstabbed and feel like it can be difficult to depend on America in the future.
But it's all about collaboration, says Greenlandic MP Kupanuk Olsen.
We need to learn to dance with the U.S. Yeah, we need to figure out how to
dance together.
Yes, dance together.
Thanks to Molly Hunter for that report.
All right, for more on this, let's bring in Kupanuk Olsen, who you just saw at the end of that piece there. She is a member of Greenland's parliament. Thanks so much for joining us. So we just heard you say Greenland needs to learn to dance with the U.S. Tell us more about what you meant by that. What are the benefits and the potential risks of deepening Greenland's relations with the U.S.?
Yeah, because the U.S. is such a huge nation. And before or later, we will need to do collaborations, business and tourism together. So, yeah, it's necessary to dance together. But it would just be really, really nice if we could be asked, would you like to dance with me, instead of being forced to dance. So that's what I meant about it.
As we just heard there in Molly's piece, it's not really a secret that Greenlanders are not happy with President Trump's plans for the territory, the things he's said a couple times now. Let's listen to some of what they had to say about this administration.
I'm a human. Humans are not for sale. We are not for sale. He's not welcome to Greenland and his administration because he wants to buy us.
We don't want you here. Just a clear message. We don't want you here.
How do you and other people who live there in Greenland, who are from there, feel about Vice President J.D. Vance's visit today?
So he has changed his visit plans to only visit Pituffik space base, which is, in my opinion, good that he has reduced his activities, because that would have interrupted so much in Sisimiut, especially during the dog sled race. So I'm grateful that they are only visiting Pituffik, and Pituffik is a place where there's a lot of U.S. military already. We are used to the Americans staying up there, so it doesn't bother us that much that he is only visiting the space base Pituffik.
Still, President Trump told reporters just this week on Wednesday the U.S. will, quote, go as far as we have to get control of Greenland. Given the growing attention on your home strategic importance in the Arctic, how does Greenland balance maintaining your autonomy with this intense and maybe unwelcome interest from the outside? I mean, do you buy that Vice President Vance is only there to visit Space Force, or do you think there's more to it?
I think there's more to it. I think they feel that they need the control over the sea area for protection of the U.S. So I understand that part, but we do not wish to become a state under the United States, because we're fighting for Greenland's independence right now. So I kind of feel like another colonizer is trying to take over my area, which we do not want. So that's, but yeah, I do think his visit has more than just visiting. I think but he has also said that he have heard of threats from China and Russia, which is not true. It's like we have never heard those threats. So it's, I'm eager to hear what he will figure out up there.
All right. Kupanuk Olsen, we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, the FAA says it's implementing changes to how helicopters operate around Washington, D.C. after January's deadly midair collision over the Potomac. This comes as members of the Senate Commerce Committee grilled the nation's top flight officials over how to prevent future catastrophes. NBC News senior correspondent Tom Costello has the details.
8 weeks since January's midair crash, the FAA announced all helicopters flying around Reagan Airport must turn on their geopositioning transmitters called ADS-B, but with some exceptions for national security aircraft. ADS-B could have provided more precise location information to controllers. Investigators say the Army helicopter was flying too high when it crashed into the regional jet that night. A commanding general told senators the chopper was flying with its ADS-B transmitter off to avoid public flight tracking software.
The crew, however, was approved to operate with that capability off in accordance with Army policy.
Army policy that continues around D.C.
I am at a loss to come up with any justification for risking the lives of the traveling public with that decision.
Meanwhile, the FAA concedes its own database included more than 15,000 proximity warnings, potential close calls between planes and choppers over a recent 3-year period at Reagan. Yet it took no action. Since the crash, the FAA has restricted chopper traffic around D.C. and is now using AI to identify potential conflicts at 21 other airports.
The next big accident is in the data right now.
Inside the hearing, family members of the 67 people who died. Tim Lilly's son, Sam, was the first officer on the passenger jet.
This has been the hardest 2 months of my life.
While the Army chopper was not transmitting ADS-B data, it was sending its transponder location signal to air traffic control. The NTSB says it plans to complete its investigation within a year. Back to you.
All right, Tom, thank you.
Firefighters are facing another day, a brutal day, on the front lines in both North and South Carolina. One fire south of Asheville is now the top priority in the nation.
In South Carolina, the Table Rock and Persimmon Ridge fires have scorched nearly 10 square miles, and they're forcing evacuations. In North Carolina, crews are dealing with flames in areas still recovering from Hurricane Helene as downed trees from the storm and dry weather conditions fuel these fires.
NBC News correspondent Marissa Parra joins us now from Pickens, South Carolina with the latest. Marissa, good morning. So we know that fire south of Asheville, it's called the Black Cove Complex Fire. It's now the nation's top priority. A complex fire is when basically 2 or more fires are in the same area. Are firefighters making any progress there?
Hey, Joe and Savannah. So, yeah, just to keep it straight, because I know it gets a little confusing. So multiple fires across the Carolinas. We are, of course, in South Carolina, and there's a complex fire that we're right next to. But the one you're talking about, North Carolina, north of the border. And we do know, as you mentioned, the nation's top firefighting priority. This means there's 500 personnel assigned, tasked with trying to fight it, keep it under control. At last check, those latest numbers, it's around 17% containment. Yesterday, we were reporting that they were making some progress on that, which is, of course, positive news, but we're waiting for some fresh numbers to really get a sense of where that stands. But you mentioned Hurricane Helene's impact. I will point out that North Carolina so far remains the only place where we have seen structures lost from this set of wildfires, guys. At last check, it was around a dozen homes. Yesterday, we spoke to a man who lost his home, and he had his structure. It survived Hurricane Helene 6 months ago, but he called it the Cabin of Hope. And unfortunately, this home that he loved dearly was lost to these fires, but he's getting a lot of support from the community that's stepping up to help him out.
Marissa, the Carolinas, as I mentioned just a moment ago, still recovering from Hurricane Helene. It hit 6 months ago. How is the aftermath of that storm impacting the fire situation now? Downed trees, what it's done to the vegetation, that type of thing.
Right. So I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, because obviously North Carolina is where we saw some of the worst damage, right? We talked about the fatalities from Hurricane Helene, and so much of that was concentrated in North Carolina. But even here in South Carolina, I actually just got an update from one of the media personnel here who's explaining to me that even here in South Carolina, the damage may not have been as bad, but it is still a huge part of why we're seeing the fire growth we're seeing. Because this complex fires, we're seeing a combined 10,000 acres. They have continued to grow. The Table Rock fire, the Persimmon Ridge fire, and they said that it is the leftover debris, those fallen trees, even here in this local area. We got a firsthand look yesterday. That is a big part of why we are seeing this massive fire growth. It's making it a lot harder for fire crews to move through the forest to get to where they need to as well. And on top of that, guys, we are looking at strong winds today, which is also not going to make things any easier for the crews on the ground here.
Yeah, Marissa, I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, we know there are new red flag warnings for today for the western parts of the Carolinas. It's because of those gusty winds, also just dry conditions. Talk about how much harder that makes it for the firefighters.
Infinitely harder. The stronger the winds, the harder it is, right? Because it's going to, of course, push the fire and the flames not only faster, but in potentially unpredictable directions. And of course, that, makes it more dangerous for them. When I first got here a couple of days ago, those winds were a lot stronger than they are today and yesterday. But still, they're not as small and as slow as they would like them to be. I mean, ideally, there's no winds at all. But they are still going to see some stronger than normal winds today. And so in terms of the firefighting efforts, we have been on the ground. We've talked about the controlled burn, the back burn. They'll continue to do that. It did seem to work here. We were seeing the flames getting pretty close to where we are now. Those flames do seem to have receded from where we are. But again, with those winds, they're going to continue to really rely on the aircraft, helicopters. They even had the first time in South Carolina history, guys, an air tanker was used to drop fire retardant on nearby homes to protect them. The first time in this state history. And they're going to continue to see that throughout the day as well.
Yeah, not a place you expect to see that. All right, Marissa Parra, thank you for your reporting.
Well, let's get some more details on what to expect this weekend amid these ongoing wildfires. Time for your Morning News Now weather.
Meteorologist Angie Lastman joins us with the forecast. Angie, good morning.
Hi, guys. Good morning. We do indeed have those strong winds, the low humidity values expected again in that same region today. Right now, we're running about 55 to 65% for our relative humidity, and our winds are out of the southwest just at 5 miles per hour. But yes, we still do have those red flag warnings. You can see where they're centered, Asheville, Greenville included in those. This is what we're going to see here as we get into the afternoon, though. Dropping humidity levels. So where you see this darker brown, that's about 20%. We've got the kind of tan shade, that's about a 30% humidity level. And then the green is about 40%. So not great. Still really dry air in place. This, of course, just one of the ingredients that firefighters don't want to see. On top of that, those winds will remain out of the southwest, but they're going to up to about 20 to 30 miles per hour here as we get into the later parts of today. So that's what's happening with the fires. We're also going to watch kind of an active pattern set up across the country when it comes to a stormy weekend ahead. And we've already got that going for folks across parts of the South. Texas, Louisiana, you're waking up to some flood watches. We've seen some flash flood warnings in extreme southern portions of Texas closer to the border, including Brownsville. But this big batch of moisture has kind of interrupted those early morning drives for a lot of folks across parts of northern Texas, specifically Dallas, waking up to some wet weather. And this kind of batch of rain is going to slide a little farther to the east and north here as we get the day going and last into the afternoon hours. We'll still see that flash flood risk, specifically across parts of the Gulf Coast, where we're going to expect the highest amounts of rainfall as we get through the weekend. By tomorrow, notice you might be wanting it to look like spring outside, but it's not going to feel like that, and it's not going to look like that across parts of the upper Midwest, stretching basically from the Dakotas to Maine. We could see some of this kind of snow, some ice, and wintry weather. That's going to make travel difficult. We could see some down power lines as well, but we'll also see that heavy rain for folks across the Mississippi Valley and a potential for some stronger storms to develop late in the evening hours tomorrow. So Kansas City, Saturday night, that's one of the spots where you're going to want to watch for some of those stronger storms. This all moves to the east here as we get into your Sunday. Those downpours will be across parts of the southeast, the rain, the snow, the ice across the northeast and the upper Midwest. And guys, more than 50 million people under risk for severe weather. Some of those do include strong, long-lived tornadoes, the damaging wind gusts, and golf ball size hail. So an active weekend across much of the east.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.